Welcome back to another episode of our story showcase. If you believe in standing your ground, knowing your worth, and letting your talent speak louder than disrespect, hit that subscribe button and leave your thoughts in the comments below. In today's feature story, a brilliant yet ignored designer crafts her older sister's custom wedding gown, hand embroiders the veil, and designs the entire visual aesthetic for an elite wedding, all completely unpaid and without credit. But when she arrives on the big day wearing her own elegant design, she is stopped at the entrance and told her name isn't on the guest list. Her mother casually admits she was intentionally excluded, so as not to embarrass her sister's wealthy new-in-laws. Instead of making a loud scene, she turns around, walks away, and sends an itemized invoice for $27,500. What follows is a story of long overdue justice, hidden identities, and reclaiming one's true voice. Here is her story. On the day of my sister's wedding, I stood at the grand stone archway of a historic estate wearing a gown I had conceptualized and sewn entirely by hand. It was soft dove-gray silk with a high neckline, clean tailored lines, and subtle embroidery. Understated, elegant, and worth far more than the average cost of the event itself. I approached the reception entrance, where a young event coordinator stood holding a digital tablet. I offered a small, polite smile. "Name, please?" she asked warmly. "Clara Vance," I replied softly. She tapped the screen, paused, and looked up. "Could you spell that for me?" I spelled it out. She tapped again, scrolled down the list, rescanned the registry, and then spoke the words that altered everything. "I'm so sorry, but your name isn't on the approved guest list." I took a slow breath. There must be an oversight. I designed the bride's gown. I'm her sister. The staff member looked visibly uncomfortable, tapping her screen again. "I understand, ma'am, but the head planner gave us explicit instructions. Only pre-approved guests are permitted past this checkpoint." I stood motionless for a brief second. Then, over the woman's shoulder, I saw my mother, Eleanor Vance, gliding across the marble terrace toward us. She wore a tailored ice blue dress and walked with the unhurried confidence of a woman who felt she was above reprimand. Her face didn't register surprise or concern when she saw me standing outside. In fact, she looked entirely prepared. "You actually showed up," Eleanor said, her voice smooth and low. "That was bold of you." I kept my tone perfectly level. "I'm not on the guest list, Mom." "No," Eleanor replied, folding her gloved hands together. "We didn't include you." "Why?" I asked. Eleanor glanced around quietly, making sure no nearby guests were within earshot, then stepped closer. "Your sister is marrying into a prominent, generational family. Wealthy, established, traditional. We simply couldn't risk having a struggling, self-employed designer standing around in a homemade outfit, reminding everyone of our family's modest past." The words hung in the warm afternoon breeze. I stiffened slightly, but I did not let my expression crumble. "I'm not an embarrassment, Mom. You've always chosen an unconventional path, Clara, and that's fine for your private life," Eleanor said dismissively. "But today isn't about you. It's Victoria's moment to shine. Let her have it." "I spent 8 weeks making her gown," I said quietly. "I designed the invitations, the menus, and the floral layout." Eleanor offered a faint smile that never reached her eyes. "And we are genuinely grateful for the help, dear. But your contribution is finished now. It's time for you to head home." It was a clean, practiced dismissal, cruel in its utter politeness. I felt the sharp sting in my chest, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing a tear. Instead, I looked directly into my mother's eyes and spoke without elevating my voice. "Then pay for the wedding dress." Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. "What?" I said. I repeated evenly. "You can go ahead and pay for the wedding dress." Before she could process what I meant, I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't rush, I didn't look back, and I didn't shed a tear on that gravel driveway. I stepped into my car, pulled out my laptop, opened a pre-drafted document and pressed send. 3 days later, my mother's phone recorded 98 missed calls to my personal line. This isn't merely a story about being excluded from a family gathering. It is about what happens when the quiet person you dismiss turns out to be the foundational pillar, holding up your entire image. At 32 years old, I lived alone in a renovated, high-ceiling studio loft above an art gallery in historic Charleston, South Carolina. To my family and neighbors, I seemed unassuming, polite, reserved, and private. However, behind my quiet routine was a reality my family knew nothing about. Under the professional brand pseudonym, Eloise, I had become one of the most sought-after, respected figures in high-end bridal couture. My designs had been worn by heiresses, media executives, and political figures. My work wasn't loud or trendy. It was defined by meticulous hand-stitching, imported textiles, and timeless elegance. I kept my identity hidden behind the name Eloise deliberately. In my industry, anonymity offered total freedom. I didn't do red carpet interviews, I didn't post personal videos, and I avoided industry galas. All contracts were managed through an agent and registered under my holding company, CV Atelier LLC. No one in my family knew about my success, and I preferred it that way. The Vance family was obsessed with social standing. My mother, Eleanor, had spent her adult life trying to climb into elite local social circles. My older sister, Victoria, was the family trophy, polished, competitive, and raised to marry well. I, with my ink-stained fingers, late-night sewing, and passion for pattern-making, had never fit their mold. My father had been the only person in the household who truly supported my creativity, but he died unexpectedly of heart failure when I was 16. After his passing, I became invisible to them. So when Victoria called me several months before her wedding, her voice dripping with artificial warmth, I felt a foolish flicker of hope. "Clara, darling," Victoria had said over the phone, "I want something truly unique for my gown, but the high-end boutiques are quoting ridiculous prices. I know you do your little sewing projects. Would you design my dress? You could save us so much money, and it would mean so much to have family involved." I didn't agree because I needed work. I agreed because some small, buried part of me still wanted to be accepted by my sister. Over the next 2 months, I dedicated more than 120 hours to her dress. I ordered fine French Chantilly lace, hand-beaded the bodice with hundreds of tiny seed pearls, and hand-finished every interior seam. When Victoria complained that the rest of the wedding planning was falling behind budget, I quietly stepped in. I designed the physical invitation suites, hand-gilded the place cards, created the custom menus, and drafted the layout for the floral arches. No one offered to pay for my time. No one asked how much the raw materials cost. They simply took my labor for granted, assuming it was my duty to serve them. The morning of the wedding, I dressed with deliberate care. I wore my custom gray silk dress, a pair of subtle pearl earrings my father had given me before he died, and a light pink lipstick. It was a quiet statement of dignity. When I arrived at the venue, I walked past the stone fountains and rose arbors I had mapped out on paper, only to be stopped at the door and told I was banned from the room. Sitting in a quiet cafe 3 days after the wedding, I looked down at my phone. 98 missed calls. Eleanor Vance. There was a single voicemail. I pressed play and listened to my mother's anxious voice. "Clara, call me back immediately. We received an electronic invoice in our email, and there has clearly been an absurd mistake. $27,500? This isn't funny. Call your sister or call me right now." I deleted the voicemail without replying. Silence was no longer my retreat. It was my boundary. As I stirred my tea, my mind drifted back to the childhood that had shaped me. I hadn't always been this detached. As a young girl, I had cried over forgotten birthdays and cold family dinners. I used to wear clothes I disliked and force bright smiles, desperate for a single word of praise from Eleanor. But approval was a currency reserved exclusively for Victoria. Victoria's childhood drawings were framed on the wall. Mine were thrown in the trash. Victoria was enrolled in etiquette classes and modeling workshops. I was left at home. When I talked about pursuing garment design, my mother would sigh and say, "That isn't a career, Clara. It's a silly pastime. Stop being dramatic." Only my father, James Vance, had seen my potential. He was a quiet, practical man who spent his weekends fixing things around the neighborhood. When I showed him my very first fashion sketch at age 11, a lavender gown drawn in colored pencils, he looked at it carefully and said, "You have a rare gift, Clara. Don't ever let anyone convince you that seeing beauty is a weakness." He began quietly buying me books on pattern making and textile histories. When Eleanor criticized my interests, he would intervene gently, saying, "Let Clara follow her own path, Eleanor." When he died, the small shield protecting me disappeared. Victoria wept dramatically in public and received attention from everyone. I grieved silently behind my bedroom door. No one noticed that I stopped sketching for 6 months. No one noticed when I stopped coming down for dinner. I faded out of the household dynamic. When I applied to a prestigious design academy in New York and earned a full merit scholarship, Eleanor didn't congratulate me. She simply remarked, "Well, at least we won't have to pay tuition." That rejection was painful, but it forced me to build resilience. In New York, I immersed myself in my craft. I worked late-night shifts for local tailors, studied historical garments, and sold digital sketches under anonymous handles. I built my expertise stitch by stitch, earning respect through skill rather than family connections. By the time I returned to South Carolina to launch my independent studio, I had built a career my family couldn't comprehend. They continued to view me as the struggling, eccentric daughter, completely unaware that the luxury boutiques they idolized were selling my custom gowns. The irony of Victoria's wedding was deeper than my family realized. 6 months before the wedding, Victoria announced her engagement to Julian Sterling, the heir to a prominent commercial real estate firm. What Victoria didn't know was that Julian's family firm owned a major stake in Sterling and Vance Luxury Retail, a regional high-end distributor that had been attempting to sign an exclusive partnership contract with my brand, Eloise, for over a year. I had been communicating with Julian Sterling's executive team through my legal agent for months. They knew me only as Eloise. I had politely declined their exclusive licensing offers because I valued my creative control. When Victoria first called me asking for help with her dress, I had considered telling her the truth about my career. But I knew how my family operated. Victoria would have turned it into a competition, and Eleanor would have demanded I use my industry contacts to advance Victoria's social status. So I kept quiet and let my work speak for itself. During the 8 weeks of preparation, the disrespect was constant. Eleanor would forward my emails back to me with harsh edits. "The train needs to be 2 feet longer. Victoria thinks the lace looks too plain. Add more sparkle. Make sure there are no visible brand labels inside. This is a private family event, not a promotional showcase for your little business." I absorbed every critique, made every alteration, and delivered the completed gown 2 weeks before the ceremony. Then came the second week of May, when the formal wedding invitations were mailed out. They arrived in heavy cream envelopes, sealed with a gold monogram I had personally hand-drawn. My clients, some of whom belonged to the same social clubs as Julian's family, received theirs and messaged me to compliment the design. My mailbox, however, remained empty. When I sent Victoria a polite text asking if my invitation had been mislaid in the mail, she replied casually, "Oh, I'm sure Mom organized the distribution list. I'll ask her about it." She never followed up. A week before the wedding, a colleague shared a photo of the finalized seating chart on social media. I zoomed in on the digital image. I scanned every table, every row, every name. My name was nowhere on the chart. I had designed the digital vector file for that exact seating board. Someone had taken my master file, deleted my name from table 4, and printed the modified board. They hadn't forgotten me. They had systematically removed me. While Eleanor was leaving frantic voicemails on my phone 3 days after the wedding, a very different realization was occurring in the honeymoon suite of the grand estate. Julian Sterling stood by the tall glass windows, reviewing administrative files on his tablet, while Victoria sat in front of the vanity mirror, still admiring her custom wedding dress draped over a mannequin stand. Julian walked over to inspect the gown's craftsmanship. As he turned the inner silk lining over to check the seam construction, his eyes caught a tiny, intricate detail stitched near the hem in pale silver thread. An intertwined E and a stylized L, the distinct, signature monogram of Eloise. Julian stopped. His expression changed. "Victoria, where did you purchase this gown?" Victoria turned around, smiling lightly. "Oh, I told you. It was custom-made. We didn't go through a boutique." "Who constructed it?" Julian asked, his tone suddenly serious. Victoria hesitated, her smile faltering. Just my sister Clara. She went to school for apparel design. She offered to sew it for us because our planning budget was tight. Julian stared at his new bride in complete disbelief. Your sister Clara is the designer behind CV Atelier? She is Eloise. Victoria scoffed nervously. What? No. Eloise is just a fancy name she uses for her social media pages. It's not a real corporate brand, Julian. She just does local alterations and small sewing jobs. Why are you making a big deal out of this? Julian pulled up a confidential corporate file on his tablet and turned the screen toward her. Eloise is the lead designer our family firm has been trying to sign to an exclusive $2 million contract for 14 months, Julian said, his voice cold and measured. Her designs brought in over $4 million in luxury retail sales last year alone. My board has been trying to secure a meeting with her legal representatives all spring. And you're telling me she is your sister? Victoria's face lost all its color. I didn't know she was that successful. She never told us. Did you ever ask her? Julian countered sharply. You told me she was an uncooperative relative who refused to participate in family events. You told me she didn't care about your wedding. She is difficult, Victoria shouted, growing defensive. If we had made a massive big deal out of her making the dress, she would have taken over the spotlight. It was my wedding day, Julian. I wanted the focus to be on us, not on her sewing career. Julian looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the very first time. You used her world-class work, took credit for the aesthetic, and then banned her from the venue? My mother handled the guest list. Victoria stammered, stepping back. You lied to me, Julian said quietly. You sabotaged a major professional relationship for our family business out of petty insecurity. He turned away from her, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of the room, leaving Victoria standing alone in front of the mirror. The formal invoice had arrived in Eleanor's primary email inbox on Sunday evening at 6 p.m. It was issued officially from CV Atelier LLC. It contained no emotional notes, no dramatic accusations, and no informal commentary. It was a legally binding, itemized commercial bill. Client: Eleanor Vance/Victoria Vance. Event: Sterling Vance Wedding Services. Itemized services. 1. Bespoke bridal gown design and construction $14,500. Imported French Chantilly lace $3,200 raw. Hand-beaded pearl bodice, 45 hours labor. Custom silk interior lining and boning. 2. Custom veil and headpiece construction $2,800. 16 hours hand embroidery. 3. Stationery and visual identity design $4,200. Custom monogram vector design. Hand-gilded invitation suite, 150 units. Menu cards and seating chart layout. 4. Event styling and floral architecture layout $3,000. 5. Rush turnaround and late-stage alterations $3,000. Subtotal: $27,500. Tax and licensing fees included. Total amount due within 7 days, $27,500. Equals 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 equals. Terms: failure to settle commercial invoices for custom apparel and IP design within 7 business days will result in immediate legal collection proceedings. When Eleanor showed the document to Victoria on Wednesday morning, Victoria nearly dropped her coffee cup. $27,500? Victoria's riquez. Is she insane? She's my sister. She offered to help. She can't legally enforce this, Eleanor said, pacing across her kitchen floor. There was no signed contract. Julian stepped into the kitchen carrying his briefcase. He looked at the electronic invoice resting on Eleanor's laptop screen, then looked up with a dry, humorless smile. Actually, she can enforce it, Julian said calmly. What are you talking about, Julian? Eleanor demanded. Family favors aren't billable. She holds registered copyright trademarks for the monogram designs printed on all your invitations, Julian explained coldly. She has documented proof of purchasing the raw textiles under her corporate account. And because you didn't include her on the guest list or execute a written gift agreement, this defaults to a standard commercial transaction for custom apparel. If you don't pay this invoice, her legal team will file an enforcement lien, and it will become public record. Eleanor's face turned pale. Public court records would ruin her standing in her social club. Victoria grabbed her phone and dialed my number again. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed a second time. It was instantly declined. She isn't answering. Victoria cried out, tears of frustration finally spilling over. Why is she doing this to us? Julian looked at Victoria with utter indifference. She isn't doing anything to you, Victoria. She simply stopped letting you exploit her. While my family was panicking over the financial invoice, I was addressing a long overdue personal matter. With my father's estate finally completing its final probate review 6 years after his death, I was required to visit my childhood family home one last time to retrieve my remaining personal belongings from the attic before Eleanor listed the house for sale. I unlocked the old front door. The house smelled of old wood, faint lavender, and stale air. I walked upstairs to the cramped attic space where dust particles floated in the sunlight pouring through the small window. In the back corner rested a dusty cardboard box labeled, "Clara's drawings, keep safe." It was written in my father's neat, patient handwriting. I opened the box. Inside were my childhood sketchbooks, my early watercolor attempts, and old fabric swatches. At the very bottom of the box lay a sealed white envelope wrapped in protective plastic. My name was written on the front in my father's hand, Clara. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the sheet of paper inside. My brilliant Clara, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to step between you and the noise of the world. I know it is difficult living in a house where your quiet talent is treated as an inconvenience. I see how much it hurts when your mother and sister overlook your efforts. But I need you to promise me something. Do not ever dim your light just to make them feel comfortable. Do not trade your authentic identity for their approval. You possess an extraordinary creative spirit. Whatever room you walk into in this life, walk in standing tall as yourself. They may never understand your value, but that does not lessen your worth for a single second. With all my love, Dad. I sat on the wooden attic floor, pressed the letter to my chest, and finally allowed myself to cry. They were not tears of grief or anger. They were tears of profound release. I had spent years searching for validation from a mother and sister who were incapable of providing it, while the only man whose opinion truly mattered had already given me everything I needed years ago. I folded the letter carefully, placed it safely in my bag, and walked downstairs. I returned to my studio loft, logged onto my primary business portal, and opened my public professional profile. For years, the page had read, Eloise, Anonymous Bridal Design. I clicked Edit. I deleted the handle Eloise. In its place, I typed my real name in bold, clean lettering. Clara Vance Atelier. Couture Design and Apparel. I clicked Publish. The public announcement sent immediate shockwaves through the regional design industry. Within 48 hours, high-fashion publications, local magazines, and industry blogs picked up the news. Renowned anonymous designer, Eloise revealed as Clara Vance. My business email inbox was flooded with interview requests, magazine feature invitations, and contract inquiries from major fashion houses across the country. On Friday morning, my administrative team received a formal settlement confirmation. Eleanor Vance had wired the full $27,500 payment to CV Atelier LLC to avoid legal proceedings and public court filings. An hour later, a private courier delivered a formal, multi-page partnership proposal from Sterling and Vance Retail, signed personally by CEO Julian Sterling. The deal offered complete creative autonomy, a massive yearly retainer, and prominent brand distribution. I reviewed the contract at my desk. Then, I handed the tablet back to my studio assistant. "Please send a formal refusal," I said calmly. My assistant blinked in surprise. "Are you certain, Clara?" This is an extraordinarily lucrative offer. I am completely certain, I replied. I have no interest in entering business partnerships built on compromised ethics and past disrespect. That evening, I posted a single photograph to my official brand page. A simple, elegant shot of my hands sketching a new design on fresh paper. The caption read, "It took me many years to realize I didn't need anyone's permission to occupy space. Build your own foundation, know your worth, and never let anyone erase your name from your work." 3 weeks after the wedding, Victoria arrived unannounced at my studio downtown. She looked noticeably different. Her usual polished, confident composure was gone. She wore simple clothes, her eyes were tired, and she looked visibly humbled. My receptionist informed me of her arrival. I agreed to speak with her in my private side office. Victoria sat across from me at a small round glass table. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. "I came to apologize," Victoria said, her voice cracking slightly. "I was wrong, Clara. About everything." I looked at her calmly, keeping my posture steady. "Go on." "I was jealous of your talent," Victoria confessed, looking down at her hands. "I thought if we kept you in the background, I could keep the attention on myself. But all I did was show Julian how insecure and cruel I could be. He barely speaks to me now. He doesn't trust me. I ruined my own marriage before it even truly began." "You didn't just act out of jealousy, Victoria," I said evenly. "You took my labor, used my design skills to elevate your event, and then had Mom tell me I was an embarrassment at the door." "I know," Victoria whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking if you can ever forgive me." I took a slow, deep breath. "I have already forgiven you," I replied quietly. Victoria's eyes lifted with a faint glimmer of hope. "Really?" "Yes," I continued firmly. "Forgiveness means I no longer carry anger toward you. But forgiveness does not mean you automatically retain access to my life." Victoria froze. "What do you mean?" "I spent 20 years shrinking myself so you and Mom wouldn't feel threatened by my existence," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "I made myself small, quiet, and invisible. That period of my life is officially over. I wish you well, Victoria, but I am closing this chapter." I stood up, walked to the office door and opened it. Victoria rose slowly, realizing that no amount of tears or apologies could undo years of calculated neglect. She walked out of the studio, leaving me standing in a space built entirely by my own hands. 2 months later, the main hall of my studio was cleared of luxury mannequins and high-end silk bolts. In their place stood 10 long wooden drafting tables equipped with sketchpads, measuring tapes, rolls of affordable muslin, and sewing tools. Sitting at those tables were 12 young women, high school students and young adults from modest backgrounds who had applied for my new, fully funded community design mentorship program. I stood at the head of the room, wearing comfortable jeans and a simple linen shirt. "Welcome, everyone," I said with a warm smile. "I know what it feels like to sit in a room and wonder if your creative voice matters. I know what it feels like when people tell you that your passion is just a silly distraction. But this studio is a safe space where no one will ever ask you to prove your worth. You are already worthy." A young girl in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. "Ms. Vance, my family tells me that high fashion is only for wealthy people. Can someone like me really build a real career in this?" I walked over to her table, looked her directly in the eyes, and smiled gently. "True elegance isn't about money or social standing," I told her. "It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone make you feel small. The most valuable garment you will ever design is your own self-respect." The room went quiet, followed by a soft wave of inspired smiles. Later that evening, after the students had departed, I walked to the back wall of my private office. Pinned to the center corkboard was my father's letter, right beside my very first childhood drawing of a lavender gown. I unrolled a fresh sheet of drafting paper on my central table, picked up my favorite pencil, and began to sketch. The lines flowed effortlessly across the page. When the design was complete, I signed my full name at the bottom in bold, confident strokes, Clara Vance. I stepped back, looked at the completed work in the warm evening light, and smiled. I had lost a toxic family dynamic, but I had gained my true self. I didn't need their invitations, I didn't need their seats at their tables, and I no longer needed their permission to shine. And that is how Clara Vance took back her identity, her career, and her self-respect, not through petty revenge, but through complete self-worth and undeniable excellence. What would you have done in Clara's position? Would you have walked away at the door? Would you have sent the $27,500 invoice? Or would you have handled things differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. If this story inspired you to stand tall and value your worth, please give this video a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narrative stories every week. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.